On today's show, we go into the details of the Houston Rockets signing Bruno Fernando to a new contract, what that means for the Houston Rockets roster as a whole as we navigate this offseason, and we'll take a look at the trade market right now for Eric Gordon and some of the other moving pieces around the NBA that are impacting the possible trade market for one Eric Gordon, as well as, hey, we're going to fire up the trade machine and take a look at some possible destinations for him. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Remember, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Go comment on the show. Helps out a ton. Now, for today's episode, we are going to talk about Bruno in today's episode. Even though we talked about Bruno a little bit last time, we'll talk about him again, the implications of his new contract for the Houston Rockets, what his role may look like moving forward on this Rockets roster, how that contract impacts the rest of this Rockets roster and their flexibility the rest of this offseason. Then we'll take a look at some of the market factors at play, some of the things going on around the NBA landscape that may be, limiting the possible return on an Eric Gordon deal this offseason. And then for funsies, in segment 3, we'll fire up the trade machine and run through a handful of Eric Gordon trade scenarios, ranging from, very basic in structure to getting a little bit more complicated down, as we navigate through the trades. So let's start with Bruno Fernando, right? Mentioned it last episode, but Bruno inking a new contract with the Houston Rockets. It's per Jonathan Fagan of the Houston Chronicle. It is an Exhibit 10 deal, which is effectively, what we've boiled it down to in previous episodes, years, whatever. It's a training camp contract. It's a deal to come in and be a part of Rockets training camp, be on the training camp roster, and have a chance to, prove himself, right? To show the organization, hey, I deserve to be here. And the cool thing about these Exhibit 10s is it has the ability to be converted to a two-way contract. So if the Rockets like what they see out of Bruno Fernando, if they decide they want to hold on to him, keep him around, they still have that second two-way slot open, and they could very easily commit that two-way slot to Bruno Fernando. So maybe that's a reason why we didn't see the Rockets just jump, to sign Eric Holman to that remaining two-way roster spot. I know Eric Holman, had some flashes. He had some impressive play here and there throughout Vegas Summer League. But as far as just, a prospect to kind of have waiting in the wings, trying to prove themselves, I'd rather have Bruno Fernando 11 times out of 10 over Eric Holman at this point in their respective careers. And from what we've seen out of both of them, Bruno Fernando looked pretty solid in the minutes that he got with the Rockets. It wasn't a ton, but in the few moments where he was on the floor with the Rockets last season, he made his presence felt, right? He was, a decent enough defender, not nothing to write home about, but passable at times, set good screens offensively, was a force on the interior, right? Was able to get, was a good role threat. All these different things that he had kind of going for him in the brief spot minutes that he got here and there in garbage time, all that. Never going to forget the night that he went off against the Mavericks, the awakening of one Bruno Fernando, his welcome to the NBA moment, if you will. It was really cool. And this is all without the fact that he never really unveiled his three-point shot last season. So if that's something he's been able to work on a little bit more, and if he can provide some five-out spacing as well as some interior size and the ability to be a vertical spacing lob threat, or at least a decent rim running big, if you will, even if he's not completely playing over the top of defenses, then he's got a lot working for him, at least offensively. So I like the idea that the Rockets are going to at least keep him around and kind of see what he can do, what he can provide, what he can produce. And I also love the dynamic here now potentially at play, between the backup point guard spot for the Rockets and the backup center spot for the Rockets, because now you got the backup point guard spot. You got Ty Washington in one corner and Jae'Sean in another corner, two guys who are going to have to fight it out for those backup point guard minutes. And now you also possibly have two guys in Usman Garuba and Bruno Fernando, who are going to be kind of fighting it out potentially for those backup center minutes over the course of the season if the Rockets commit that two-way contract to Bruno Fernando a little bit further down the line, which, hey, if he's, unless he's just terrible in training camp, I don't see why they wouldn't ultimately go with the two-way contract in his favor. I was thinking that Bruno Fernando would get picked up by another NBA team, just, looking to take a flyer on a big man, team-friendly contract, what have you. But if nobody else is willing to sign him and the Rockets can keep him for cheap on a two-way deal and kind of, again, make it a prove-it contract, like show us you're worth it, and then we'll give you another NBA standard deal further down the line, maybe, then I like it. I'm totally here for it. Now, what this means for the Rockets roster for the rest of this offseason, they are now at 20 rostered players, which means they can no longer make any other moves. They can't, sign anybody. They can't bring anybody else in. They can't trade for more than, one guy unless it's a one-for-one deal, right? They can't bring in any excess bodies by way of trade unless they cut or waive somebody on the current roster. So it does limit some of their flexibility as far as the moves that they're planning to potentially make. However, again, there's still all the leftover guys from the Christian Wood Dallas Mavericks trade, the majority of which are probably not going to be here. There's maybe some question marks about if Boban Marjanovic will actually be around, next season if the Rockets do want to hold on to him. But the other three guys in the trade will more than likely get waived. So that'll open up a little bit more flexibility further down the line for the Rockets to make some potential moves, to add some names, while they still have the flexibility of the 20-man offseason roster to make some, potential trades work a little bit easier, rather than the confines of the 15-man roster once we get to the actual NBA season. So just some thoughts there on what the contract means for Bruno Fernando, what it means for the Rockets. And again, if he's able to get to training camp and impress this Rockets team, then maybe he has an opportunity to actually carve out some NBA minutes. Possibly, right? I was, of the belief that if the Rockets could, have an extra roster spot floating around somewhere at the end of the bench, this upcoming year, that holding on to Bruno Fernando would not be the worst idea in the world. And right now, with Usman Garuba is your clear-cut backup center, but there's so many question marks about, his availability. Is he going to be healthy? Like, what's he going to look like, right? Might as well have another prospect just kind of waiting in the wings to absorb some garbage time minutes and, be ready to play on any given night, depending on what's going on with the rest of the roster. So I like it. I like the chance for Bruno to kind of prove himself. And hey, I'm glad we got another chance to talk about Bruno. So coming up, do want to talk about some of the factors at play around the NBA landscape that could be limiting a potential return on an Eric Gordon trade. And then, of course, we'll get to some hypothetical EG trades a little bit later on in the episode. But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for all odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every single major league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, fighting, MMA, UFC, boxing, esports, even golf. They've got you covered for everything over at BetOnline. And right now you can take a look at the odds-on favorites for the NBA title next season. Right now, the Boston Celtics leading the way at plus 400. I'm sure the KD rumors have a little something to do with that as far as the odds makers are concerned. Milwaukee Bucks at plus 625. Golden State Warriors in third place at plus 700. LA Clippers at plus 750, and then rounding out the top five, the Phoenix Suns at plus 950. So for all of that and more odds, head to their website today to learn about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's take a look around the NBA landscape at a couple of the different factors kind of potentially limiting a return on an Eric Gordon deal for the Houston Rockets, at least as it pertains to this offseason. Now, the first of those situations is going to be the holdup regarding the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving. That's kind of number one on the menu here because, and by extension, Kevin Durant, like just it feels like the moment the KD trade request came in, a lot of different things got immediately, like everybody hit the brakes and things got thrown into, like the entire offseason got thrown into NBA limbo and purgatory, because when a guy like Kevin Durant becomes available on the market, half the teams in the association suddenly stop their operating maneuvers and they're like, all right, wait, could we be in play for KD? Or could we be in play as the third team to help facilitate KD, right? A bunch of different things. And that immediately, everybody's, all the assets become frozen. Everything becomes a gigantic waiting game to see how that first very big, albeit very big domino is going to fall, right? That's a 7-foot domino that has a lot of sway in the NBA landscape. So, but the extension of that is a guy like Kyrie Irving, right? Who's kind of that second Brooklyn Nets domino that has yet to fall. And at this point, it feels like it's becoming increasingly more likely that we may have run some victory laps a little bit prematurely with the Brooklyn Nets, because it might just be the case where both of those guys are still in Brooklyn to start the season. Now, whether or not they actually suit up and play for Brooklyn, and if they do suit up and play, whether or not they're actually committed to playing well, completely different conversations to have. But as far as the likelihood of them being dealt at this point, it really feels like nothing has materialized, right? The latest rumor was Boston putting Jalen Brown on the table in a KD trade request, but Sean Marks wants, an absolute haul for KD. And it feels like no team is ready to budge on that front, right? Or no team has committed an offer that matches Sean Marks's, lofty expectations in a return for Kevin Durant. So depending on how aggressively KD pursues this trade request, we may be stuck in limbo for a long time. But the Kyrie Irving factor of this, right? When there are teams out there that could reasonably be pursuing Kyrie Irving, there's some of those teams kind of match up as far as potential Eric Gordon suitors. One of those teams being the LA Lakers. And so Dave McMenamin of ESPN reported that the Lakers are not planning to pull the trigger on a deal for Eric Gordon or Buddy Hield unless they know for sure that a Kyrie Irving trade is off of the table. So that makes a fair bit of sense, right? If you're the Lakers, and you think there's even a remote chance that you could, potentially flip Russ for Kyrie and give yourself, a third star to still pair with LeBron and AD, albeit, who knows how many games those three will actually play together, right? But if you're the Lakers, you've got to try and win this Russell Westbrook situation, right? You are between a rock and a hard place with Russ, looking down the barrel of having to potentially expend not only just one, but 2 first-round picks to try and give your roster some semblance of, ability to contend this next season. And so for the Lakers, right, they're an EG destination that makes a ton of sense, right? He would help them out in a lot of different factors, and adding another veteran to that group, somebody that can actually help you win in high leverage situations. He'd be the exact type of guy you want to have playing next to LeBron and AD if the Lakers really want to try to make a run for things. But if they also think they have a shot at Kyrie Irving and they're going to need to forego some assets to make that happen, then they don't exactly have a ton of firsts laying around to throw one of those at Eric Gordon if you need one, if not both of those, to grease the wheels on a Russ for Kyrie Irving swap. So that's something to consider as far as what the market looks like for Eric Gordon and the Lakers being one of the leading contenders for a team that makes a lot of sense for Eric Gordon. The other thing to consider is what the Celtics were able to ultimately acquire Malcolm Brogdon for, right? Because Malcolm Brogdon, another veteran guard who was available on the market, and the Celtics got him for like nothing, right? I mean, they traded Aaron Naismith, Daniel Tice, Stauskas, Malik Fitz, Juwan Morgan, a couple into the bench dudes, and a first-round pick. So effectively, they got Malcolm Brogdon for a first-round draft pick, and it's not even a long-term it's not a first that's like a couple of years out. There's not a lot of flexibility with it. It's just a straight-up first-round draft pick, and it's gonna be like somewhere 25 to 30 at best. So a late first-round draft pick is what they were able to scoop up Malcolm Brogdon for, and if that's what Brogdon's market value was this offseason, I cannot imagine Eric Gordon fetching more than that, if at all, maybe even less than that this offseason. And if that's the going rate for a veteran guard, then it might just be in the Rockets' best interest to stand pat and not do anything, because you don't want to move Eric Gordon just for the sake of moving him. Like, I've, been beating the drum of the fact that the Rockets are very much up against a wall. They're going to have to start consolidating some pieces. And Eric Gordon is, right now, Eric Gordon and KJ Martin are kind of the two guys that make the most sense to be on the move if you're the Houston Rockets, right? If there's a team out there that wants to float you a future first-round draft pick for either one of those guys, you probably gobble up that trade in 2 seconds. But not if it's going to be a terrible late first round draft pick, right? And so if that's all that's available on the market, then I don't blame the Rockets if they just pump the brakes, hold on to EG, get into the season, let him play a bit of a reserved role, right? 20, 25 minutes a night, something, not too strenuous. He's not going to injure himself, still gets to showcase his talents a little bit, still work with some of the young guys, provide them some stability on the court, whether it's as a starter, whether it's off the bench, who knows? And then revisit discussions as they get closer to the trade deadline, right? But I still think a team would very much benefit from having Eric Gordon around for the entire season rather than just a half-season rental, if that. And it is important to still remember that even though the final year of Eric Gordon's contract is not guaranteed, if a team wants to acquire him, they basically could get him for a half-season rental a little bit later on. And if things work out really well with Eric Gordon, they can guarantee that final year of his contract, and they still have him for that whole extra year. If it's a dumpster fire with him, if the team needs to open up that cap space to make a play for somebody else, they have that flexibility with him. So he's effectively an expiring contract this next season. So that's worth considering as far as Eric Gordon trade scenarios are concerned. And then the other factor at play too, KJ Martin could be a potential throw-in to an Eric Gordon trade package, right? If EG by himself is only enough to get you an immediate 2023 first-round draft pick, maybe tossing in KJ Martin is enough to net you an additional float in a second, or maybe it upgrades that first to a later first, like 2024 and beyond, something to that effect. So there are a lot of different variations that could be at play here as far as a potential EG trade looks for the Rockets, but I would not get your hopes up about EG being moved this summer just because I don't think it is right now. I don't think it's like a seller's market, right? I don't think the Rockets are going to get a ton of value back for Eric Gordon if they decide to move on from him this summer. As it stands right now, my gut is telling me that he's probably going to make it to opening night as a Houston Rocket, but you never know, right? Sometimes these trades materialize overnight. If a couple teams are able to come to an agreement, they figure something out, then boom, boom, things happen, almost instantaneously. So there are a couple teams out there that have had a ton of reported interest in wanting to pursue Eric Gordon. We'll take a look at some of those hypothetical trades here coming up in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. So go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. As promised, let's take a look at some hypothetical Eric Gordon trade scenarios. And the very first one on the docket is super simple, sweet, short, to the point, all that good stuff. The Toronto Raptors, they're a destination that makes a ton of sense as an EG destination. They're a team that is trying to compete at the highest level. They want to continue to try and make noise in the playoffs. They're also not a team that necessarily has to make noise right away, but they've also got some question marks about, Gary Trent Jr., his contract structure moving forward. Eric Gordon would provide them a little bit more flexibility, right? Because Gary Trent Jr. is locked into 2 more years on his contract, whereas Eric Gordon, right, you have that flexibility of if you want to be done with him after this season, cool, wash your hands of him, he's gone, awesome. And if things work out really well and he meshes and he helps elevate them to a place where, maybe his defensive presence, helps them out on the perimeter compared to Gary Trent Jr. He's a capable scorer, just like Gary Trent Jr., right? He elevates their floor, their ceiling a little bit more so than Gary Trent Jr. does. Maybe that's worth just a 2023 first round draft pick, right? So that's on the low end of the return spectrum. Nothing fancy about this deal. It's very short, sweet, simple, to the point. Again, a very simple overall deal for the Houston Rockets and the Toronto Raptors. And I think that's a dark horse team, right, that you should keep an eye on as far as a team that, would be interested in acquiring Eric Gordon's services. And it makes a lot of sense, a very easy 1-for-1 deal. Now, next on the docket, We've got a permutation of the Lakers trade, which, again, things become a little bit more difficult now that the Rockets are capped at their 20-man roster limit. So to facilitate this trade, they'd have to open up a couple different Rockets spots here. So it'd be Eric Gordon going out, and then it would be coming in from LA, Talen Horton-Tucker, Kendrick Nunn, and Max Christie, as well as that juicy 2027 first-round draft pick. Now, again, the Rockets would have to clear a couple roster spots to absorb a couple of these players, and this trade has to be done this way because the Lakers have almost zero cap flexibility. So, and they've got no mid-tier contracts to move other than THT. So this is, what the Lakers would have to pony up as far as salary to match Eric Gordon. Now, if you're the LA Lakers, right, are you really going to spend a 2027 first-round draft pick for the services of Eric Gordon? Depends on how pressed their organization is, right? Jeannie Buss was talking about the fact that she doesn't want to trade any future first-round draft picks unless it gives them a legitimate chance at a title, a legitimate chance to be contenders again. Does Eric Gordon make the Lakers contenders? Probably not, right? Maybe they're able to swing for the fences with another deal. Maybe they're able to do, a Russ swap with another team and they're able to float a first rounder that direction, maybe some seconds, right? Maybe this is, trade one or trade two of multiple trades to try and retrofit that LA Lakers roster and resolve the Russell Westbrook dilemma and all that. But this is what a trade would have to probably look like from the Rockets' end to be even remotely interested in being a trade partner with the LA Lakers. They already had their shot with John Wall, right? They could have been out and free from the Russell Westbrook contract. They didn't want to play ball with the first-round draft pick for John Wall. And if they want Eric Gordon's services, a second-round pick or a couple second-rounders ain't going to cut it. You got to throw in a first. Now, I'm sure they could throw some protections on it, right? Maybe you throw, top 5 protections. Maybe you'd be really generous and you throw like top 10 protections on it, something like that. But a first-round draft pick that is that many years out, again, 5 years out, you don't know what anything is going to look like even 2 years from now, even a year from now in the NBA landscape. So having a pick that far out and being in control of that, if you're the Houston Rockets, I maybe would be even willing to consider tossing KJ Martin in. And then again, the Lakers would have to match some of that salary, but tossing KJ Martin into this deal to get the Rockets' hands on that 2027 first round draft pick. Because again, that could be a lottery pick in the works if the Lakers just completely crumble as an organization and go, swan diving into a rebuild in the post LeBron James AD era in LA. So let's get to our next trade on the docket here. Phoenix Suns. Another team that, has definitely been continually linked to Eric Gordon, potentially interested in acquiring his services. Again, nothing super fancy here. It would be for the Rockets sending Eric Gordon to Phoenix. Coming back to Houston would be Dario Saric, Cam Payne, Josh Okogie to match salaries. Again, you'd have to cut and waive a couple of the guys that are still holdovers from the Christian Wood Dallas Mavericks deal. And then, very simple, a 2023 first-round draft pick. Now, maybe if you're the Rockets, again, you could up the ante on this deal a little bit. Maybe you could try to finesse a future first-round draft pick, seeing as how the Phoenix Suns project to be an insanely good team this next season as well, right? They're probably going to finish, somewhere top 4 in the Western Conference, probably top 5 overall in the league. So you're looking at a late first-round draft pick at absolute best. And we already know that the Rockets have turned down offers of late first-round draft picks for Eric Gordon already. So they're not going to make a move just for the sake of making a move. If all the best you can get is a late first-round draft pick, then, again, I'm probably not necessarily inclined to pull the trigger if I'm the Houston Rockets. If you're able to get them on the phone and keep them interested in a 2024 first-round draft pick, then maybe things get a little bit more interesting because then you have a whole extra year to try and facilitate that, use it as, trade bait in another deal further down the line, all that good stuff. So another kind of simple trade permutation here. Now, fourth trade on our menu out of 5 trades, because we got the fifth and final one is a doozy of a trade. It's the only 3-teamer we're looking at today. But this fourth trade I like, and these last 2 trades I will give a quick shout out, have been inspired by at BeamAthug on Twitter, David Weiner, total capologist who throws up awesome, crazy trades on social media all the time. And I kind of like this one because it kind of fits into what I mentioned briefly in our last episode talking about the Kevin Porter Jr. contract extension and what some of the implications could be for the Rockets cap space moving forward. And the idea that the Rockets could potentially be a team that opts into taking on bad money, bad contracts, whatever, bloated deals to roll over their cap space into the following summer. So instead of trying to be poised to make a move in summer 2023, they try to make a move in summer 2024 instead. And that's what this trade here accomplishes. So the Rockets would send out Eric Gordon and David Nwaba to the Charlotte Hornets. And the Hornets would send back Gordon Hayward and a 2024 first round draft pick. I like this trade for a couple different reasons. One, it would give the Rockets a future first-round draft pick, right? Not in this immediate next draft. It would give them a pick in 2024 or, again, potentially later than that. If you want to be nice with the Charlotte Hornets here, on the trade, I gave them a top 10 protection on the pick. Maybe you don't go that generous. Maybe you just make it top 5 protected, something like that. You could play ball with the Hornets a little bit. But what this does is it allows the Hornets to offload the Gordon Hayward contract and effectively become players a lot sooner in free agency with their cap room, because then they'd be able to play around in summer 2023 and have, close to a max slot available, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on what I remember looking at as far as their cap structure looked like. And I'm not going to pull it up now because it'll mess up the whole production value of the show. But it allows them to get out of the Gordon Hayward contract a year earlier, gives them some flexibility with their salary cap room, and kind of gives them the opportunity to put another, enticing piece next to LaMelo Ball so that they can continue to kind of have that upswing in the Eastern Conference, right? There's, some question marks about what their future is going to hold, what moves they're ultimately going to be able to make in the East to try and, break through and really put the right pieces around LaMelo Ball. And this could be a way for them to, without giving up a ton, right? They're not giving up a ton. It's just a future first, nothing crazy, 1 year removed. They'll still be in control of their first round draft pick in this upcoming season, which could be really important, right? Because then they're not giving up, another mid-tier lottery pick. They're, potentially holding on to that. So I kind of like this trade for a handful of reasons. And again, it gives the Rockets that opportunity to roll over some of that cap space into the following summer when Gordon Hayward's contract would be falling off of the books. Final trade that we've got here, and the button is not working. There we go. All right, final trade that we've got here, and it is a 3-team deal. Again, as proposed, slight variations as proposed by at Beam a Thug. And on this trade, it is between the Houston Rockets, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Dallas Mavericks. And I actually do really like this one because the 76ers have been heavily linked to Eric Gordon. However, it's really difficult for the 76ers to pull off a 1-for-1 Eric Gordon deal because they have almost no movable mid-tier salaries, and they'd have to combine like 3 or 4 of their rotation guys to get anywhere near Eric Gordon's salary at this point. So what this trade does, walking through all the moving parts here. So we'll start with who the 76ers are sending out. So the 76ers are effectively sending out 3 players, and they're all landing in Dallas. The Rockets are not taking back any 76ers in this, and it involves Tobias Harris, Furkan Korkmaz, and Matisse Thybulle landing in Dallas. The 76ers would receive Eric Gordon from the Houston Rockets, and they'd also pick up Bertans and Reggie Bullock from Dallas. And then that leaves the Houston Rockets walking away with Dwight Powell, Frank Ntilikina, and a 2025 first-round draft pick by way of the Dallas Mavericks. So this is another really solid deal. It allows Eric Gordon to land in Philadelphia. It gives Philly a couple really solid quality 3-and-D role players in Reggie Bullock and Eric Gordon, and then another sniper in Davis Bertans, who is, very much, a bit down on his luck, right? His value has kind of tanked a little bit as of this past season. Not because he's not still a great shooter. It's just he's not worth the, the contract that the Wizards, ridiculously signed him to. But playing alongside James Harden, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, like that could do him a lot of good, right? So I think that's a win if you're the 76ers. If you're the Dallas Mavericks, you walk away with Tobias Harris, another kind of secondary option to Luka Doncic. So then you've got Tobias Harris and Christian Wood, two guys who can absolutely feed off of and play off of Luka to help as secondary options. And on any given night, one of them can get incredibly hot and kind of help carry the offensive load alongside Luka, which is exactly what the Dallas Mavericks need. They also get Furkan Korkmaz and Matisse Thybulle, two guys, again, Korkmaz, good spot-up shooter, solid role player, can be a good part of a team. And then a defensive ace in Matisse Thybulle, right? Somebody that can help the Dallas Mavericks defense, kind of replace some of the defensive help that Reggie Bullock would be providing. Doesn't give you the same level of shooting, but still a nice pickup if you're the Dallas Mavericks. So I like that trade for them. And then at the end of the day, you look at the Houston Rockets and they're walking away with, effectively contract filler in Dwight Powell, maybe a big man that you can play around with, see what he looks like backing up Alperen Sengun. Still, not young, but not, insanely old either. He wouldn't be, part of the Rockets' young core, quote unquote, but you just see what you have with him there, right? And then you have a nice little healthy competition going on for the backup center minutes between Usman Garuba and Dwight Powell and Bruno Fernando and just all of that, right? Just throw in another big into the mix, right? And why not have two back-to-back trades with the I-45 rivals, if you will? And then you also get a much further out first-round draft pick, right? Because we talked about some 2023 draft picks. We talked about a 2024 draft pick from the Charlotte Hornets. A 2025 pick would be the furthest out pick of the five hypotheticals that I've lobbed up here today. I like it because you get a pick that, maybe it doesn't convey, crazy well, but at least a couple years further down the line, it gives you the flexibility to include in future trades. And it allows you the opportunity to, again, hold the pick over the heads of an interstate rival, a division rival. And, again, we don't know what the Dallas Mavericks are going to look like in a couple of years. That pick could be really, worthwhile. Maybe they have a down year. Maybe there's a year where I'm not wishing an injury upon anybody, but right, if an injury spell happens in Dallas and a couple guys are out, then that team could very easily finish, bottom of the league. And if you're in control of that draft pick in that 1 year, if something like that happens, then it's really fortuitous for the organization that's holding on to that pick. So I really like that trade. I like the 3-team permutation. I like the creativity of finding a way to land Eric Gordon in Philadelphia. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that trade would have generated a TPE of some caliber as well. I don't think it was like an $8 million TPE because I had to add a couple more contracts there to make the money work. But it'd be probably somewhere in that range, a little bit less than that, more or less. I'll have to verify that at a later point in time. But that's going to do it for today's episode. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app. Free and available on all platforms. Also, check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. How do you feel about those Eric Gordon trade hypotheticals? Do you think at this point it's more just worth it to hold on to Eric Gordon and see what his value would look like in the middle of the season? Or do you just want to jettison EG, get him out of here? We appreciate you. Thanks for all you've done, but you want to see the young guys get all those minutes possible. You don't want to see Eric Gordon clogging up any spots in the rotation. Let me know how you feel about that in the comments on YouTube. I read each and every one of those, but as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.